with us is Ben Jealous, the president of People for the American Way, the People for the American Way Foundation, visiting scholar with the Annenberg School at Penn State University, former president of the NAACP, former candidate for governor of Maryland. PFAW.org is the website. Ben Jealous is the Twitter handle. Ben, welcome back to the program. Also, I should note you serve as professor of practice in the Africana Studies Department at the University of Pennsylvania, where you're teaching leadership. Wow, you are one busy guy, Ben. Thanks for joining us. I'm curious your thoughts. This Supreme Court nomination and all the rhetoric around it. You've got like Senator Roger Wicker coming out and going ranting about quota systems and stuff, and as if there was no such thing as black women who are as well qualified as white men. It seems to me like this is highlighting I want to call it anachronistic, but it's not yet. I mean, it's still very, very real. But just this bizarre posture that so many of these, in particular white men in politics, are taking, but also, that we as a country have taken for some time in this context. What say you? What are your thoughts on this?
Let's start with the history, right?
Right.
How is it that we've had 164 nominees to the Supreme Court since 1789? Since 1789, and only 6 have been women, and only 2 have been black, and 0 have been a black woman.
Right.
When you contrast that with the contributions that black women have made throughout that history, I mean, Harriet Tubman was the first American woman of any color to lead a U.S. military expedition. She did it on the Combahee River in South Carolina during the Civil War. It was devastating. It's always been clear that there were black women who were geniuses among us, who were courageous, who were making great contributions to this country. And for more than a century, we've had black women lawyers who have been, Constance Baker Motley, for instance. I mean, just incredible contributors to our democracy. And yet, none of the Supreme Court. Now, one of the barriers, honestly, is that a lot of those women have been civil rights lawyers. They've been defense attorneys, and for decades now, we have not generally been putting them on the court. But Joe Biden has changed that. Mm-hmm. You've seen, I think, probably the biggest sort of quiet progressive victory of his administration has been the speed with which he has put great servants of the people on the Supreme Court. The great servants of the people in the federal courts. And now here comes his first Supreme Court opportunity, and he is committed to nominating a black woman. The good news is there are legions of not just qualified but overqualified black women who, again, have a track record, like many of Biden's nominees in the last several months, of serving the people directly as a defense lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer before they went to the bench. So,
I'm kind of grasping at how to articulate this. It seems to me like I'm an old guy, and I remember how America was in the 50s and 60s. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and how very, very different things are now from then. And it's easy to, in a time when black people are still being killed by police, with impunity, and you've got openly racist politicians running around, basically controlling the Republican Party. It's easy to despair, but it seems to me like we have gone a long way toward creating a pluralistic, multiracial, egalitarian society. Does your analysis comport with mine, Ben?
Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic about where our country is ultimately headed. Keyword ultimately. Let us never forget how the dawn arrives. The dawn arrives out of a moment of utter darkness, and the reality is that if you were up on the balcony of history, my grandmother's the granddaughter of slaves, 105, still very sharp, and that's kind of where she lives. You can see basically 100 years, 20 years behind her, and I'd say has a better view of the future, I think, than most.
Right.
Having both witnessed so much history and inherited stories firsthand from her grandparents who were born into slavery. If you're up on the balcony of history right now, you'd say, well, wait a second. If our country is just 25 years away from ending more than 4 centuries of white supremacy as the numeric basis for our democracy, well, what would you expect to happen? You would expect on the one hand, a lot of white people like you, like my dad, would be like, hooray, finally our people got to learn how to get along with somebody else, right? They're going to have to at least, make a partnership with one other group demographically in order to succeed democratically. Wonderful. But a lot of white folks would be scared by change. Would want to hold on to the old way and would be willing to do anything to do that. And that, of course, is what's happening with these voter suppression bills.
Right.
There's a set of scared people trying to hold on to their old majority by any means necessary, including subverting the constitutional rights of their neighbors. And so the good news is that, in a way, they're recognizing that the world is changing in a way that they can't, that they won't be able to always control. And so when you see them reach for the most desperate measures, it means that they ultimately are confirming what we know to be true, which is we're going to move beyond white supremacy as the numeric basis for our democracy. The only question is whether it's sooner or later.
And how as well. And although I think that the how is laid out, we had an understanding of we began in the 1950s and 60s, just to establish a metaphor here. In the 50s and 60s, we discovered the human immune system, the details of it and how it works. And it was a big, in the 60s and 70s, actually, a huge time of discovery around that. And because we had just come off World War II and we were in the Cold War, we used these war metaphors to describe the immune system, the killer T cells and stuff like that. Then we discovered that the immune system, and then we discovered that the immune system didn't act like, an army at war. It very much did not act like that. And so the metaphor in the 80s and 90s to describe the immune system became, it's looking for self and not self. In other words, that's how it's differentiating. And then we realized that more than half the cells in the human body are not even human cells. And so now the metaphor that scientists use to describe the immune system is safe and not safe. In other words, that's what it's always looking for. And it seems to me like we've gone through a similar progression with regard to race relations in this country, that, from basically, 200 and some odd years of actual legal apartheid, war basically between races, or at least a legal and gun-enforced division, to this self or not self, hey, we're different from each other. Do we stay together? Do we work together? Do we live together or not? How do we work this stuff out? To a notion that we can't have a safe society if we'd all friggin' learn to live together. And I'm curious your thoughts on that metaphor, and if you think that kind of evolution of understanding is parallel to how American society is viewing race, where are we at in the process of getting to the point where, across the racial spectrum and across the political spectrum, there's a consensus that safety for our society is the most important thing, that we must learn to live together.
Yes. I think that we're getting there. I think we're getting there in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. Part of it is that, love really does know no bounds of color, and young people across the country, across the political spectrum, continue to intermarry at increasing rates.
Right.
I live in Trump country in Maryland, and at our local YMCA, like half the old guys, it seems, in the Trump hats have black grandchildren.
Wow.
running around the YMCA pool, football players and cheerleaders and all that. So that's just kind of happened. I think the other thing, though, is that politics is a lot like physics. Something in motion tends to return to its original state. Race relations, of course, always in motion. What we forget as Americans is the original state. The reality is that the American experiment existed for a century before modern notions of race being cruel and backwards, but more recently created.
Right.
Prior to that, race was really understood to be what we would call nationality now. We Scots are a mighty race. We Irish are a mighty race. And African slaves were seen as just that, as slaves from nations in Africa. Nations, by the way, that were chosen for different skill sets. And so the reality is that if you look at the first American rebellions, they were not slave rebellions, they were colonial rebellions, and they were typically African slaves, again, who were seen as humans being from different nations, and European indentured servants who were seen as humans being from different nations. There was no penalty, no special penalty back then for, say, what we'd now call a black man or black woman having a baby. In the early days of the Virginia colony, the penalty for premarital sex interracial couple was the same as it was for any other couple.
Right. This is all like pre-1620, 1630 when they started promulgating those racial laws in Virginia, correct?
Yeah. This is all like pre-17, like mid-1700s.
Oh, okay.
Like mid-1700s. Yeah, like mid-1700s. And so so I think that's where. Like we have to understand that fundamentally there is a gravity to the human condition that pulls us back towards understanding that we have more in common than we don't, and that that race is ultimately a lie based on a lie. That racism is a lie.
So are you suggesting, Ben, and just a heads up, we've got about 50 seconds before we're going to hit a hard break I can't control. Are you suggesting that this racial construct that was artificially put together by the Virginia back in the day could evaporate? That we're going back to the original state where different people are seen as from a place rather than as of race?
Yeah, I think that we are. I think that things like DNA will accelerate us back towards that. When I was born, what we knew about our family is that we were black. What did black mean? It meant that you were at least 1/32 of African descent in the Virginia context. Now we know that my grandfather's side, we primarily come from Sierra Leone, and my grandmother's side, we originally came from Madagascar. There is a complexity. There is a race used to be a fault. Similarly, I grew up with white people who were just white, who now know that they're Irish and German, right? But somewhere along the line, they had forgotten that. So yes, I do think we'll get back to a place, where what really matters is more important, and old, blunt definitions of race are less.
Brilliant, Ben. It's always it's always so thought-provoking speaking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Appreciate you, brother.
Back at you. Thank you.